The Imperium is a magical place, and I mean that both figuratively and literally. It grabs the attention of everyone who looks into 40k, and as much as I am a card-carrying Eldar fan who complains about it hogging all the spotlight, it is at least to some extent a deserved position. Aside from being the human faction, and we are all humans, it's the premier galactic superpower, even if it is falling apart at the seams at the best of times. You can find just about anything within it, and if you can't, then it's absolutely reasonable to make up whatever lore you want and say it takes place in one of the million worlds the Imperium controls. But there's a vibe that gets everyone's attention, even if they move on to other parts of the setting sooner or later. For the life of me, I can't remember the exact line or where I heard it the first time, but a good way to describe 40k is Catholic space crusaders fighting things they don't understand and hate for it. That religious fervor that causes you to fight for the God Emperor, and unless you're an Inquisitor, to do your best to avoid learning about what you face. That's heresy after all. And even more so than the Space Marines, except for maybe the Black Templars, no one in the setting embodies this ideal more than the Sisters of Battle. These women rock up with their faith in the God Emperor and burn you alive for the sin of not worshipping him. So tell me, are you Catholic? Do you wish to see the heretics pay for their sins? And of course, do you have a moment to talk about our Lord and Savior, the Emperor of mankind? Well then, perhaps the Sisters of Battle are the 40k army for you. But before we start talking war games, how about I talk to you about something else? Food. Not just any food though, but Factor, the sponsor of this video. It can be hard to balance your schedule throughout the day. Work, family, friends, life's a busy thing. With Factor, you can stay one step ahead of cooking while staying healthy the whole time. Aside from just being plain delicious, Factor meals are all chef-crafted and dietitian approved. People whose job it is to cook nothing but healthy and tasty food are sending these meals right to your front door. All you have to do, meanwhile, is pop these bad boys in the microwave for 2 minutes, and just like that, it's time to eat. As for options, oh buddy does Factor have options. They're doubling their menu size to 80+ weekly rotating meals, with twice the amount of seafood meals, 2 times more protein options. You could even swap out the protein in those meals if you want. Do you love the taste of chicken but think pork chops are evil incarnate? Well, now you can swap them out for each other, no problem. As is normal for my meals, I tend to eat them at night. There's just something satisfying about being able to have yourself a grade A meal with no prep and no cleanup at midnight, and Factor for me is a godsend for letting me do that. And if you'd like to get yourself some Factor, I've just the thing. Head to Factor75.com or click the link below and use code PancreasFB50 to get 50% off plus free breakfast for 1 year. That's code PancreasFB50 at Factor75.com to get 50% off plus free breakfast for 1 year. Offer only valid for new Factor customers with code and qualifying auto-renewing subscription purchase. If you want good healthy food that's ready in an instant, then click the link below and get yourself some Factor today. Now then, time to go to confession. The Sisters of Battle are, at least compared to the oldest of Imperial organizations, a fairly new addition to the Imperium of Man. True, the precursors to what they would become were kind of around even during the Horus Heresy, what with Euphrates Keeler banishing a demon with her faith in the Emperor, and of course countless different organizations devoted to worshipping the Emperor exist. But the Sisters of Battle themselves didn't show up until about halfway into the Imperium's history, beginning in the 36th millennium during a slightly turbulent era known as the Age of Apostasy. Once upon a time, there was an all-female warrior cult known as the Daughters of the Emperor. They weren't the most well-traveled or well-known of folk, though they may have fought alongside Satan Sabat, but they'd been around for a little while doing warrior cult things. During this time, a fellow named Goj Van Dyer had essentially come to be the functional emperor of the Imperium. With the actual Big E stuck on a chair and for one reason or another either unable or unwilling to tell the Custodes to deal with him, he was able to become the head of the church and the administratum, aka the bureaucracy of the Imperium. Not the most interesting sounding position in a wargame setting, I'll admit, but since they're the ones who decide if your bullets make it on time or not, it gave them functionally unlimited power over the Imperium. Anyone who might have argued with him simply did not receive food this month, in addition to him declaring you were a heretical enemy of the state and throwing a crusade at you. His spies eventually found this warrior cult, and he decided they seemed pretty interesting, so he went to their home planet to see if he couldn't turn them into his own private army. Initially, they told him to go away, presumably because he was creepily hitting on them the entire time, but canon never explicitly confirms this. Never denies it either, though, and no one likes Goj, so I'm gonna assume that's what happened. Since the Daughters of the Emperor weren't from the most technologically advanced of planets, however, he had a plan to trick them by telling his aide to shoot him in the face. Secretly, he just had a shield generator that made a gold-colored shield flare up around him to keep him safe, but from the Daughters' point of view, that could quite literally only have been an act of the Emperor himself keeping the guy safe from harm. Since that looked to be a clear-cut case of divine providence, the Daughters did a 180 on their opinion of Goj and almost immediately swore loyalty to him, becoming the private army he wanted. They were renamed to the Brides of the Emperor, brought to Terra, and given the best weapons, armor, and training possible, short of Custodes equipment. Probably a whole lot of other less savory things occurred as well, because Goge Van Dyer was a bad person, even by the standards of 40k. Jumping forward a little bit, and Van Dyer's reign of terror had been going on for decades. The ecclesiarchy had much of its power and influence redirected to whatever good old Goge wanted, corruption was rampant, blatant murder disguised as executing heretics was rampant. He really was an asshole, and eventually people started rising up against him. Notably, one humble preacher named Sebastian Thor was included in this number, who eventually was able to rally people around himself, potentially including the Emperor himself, since a warp storm just so happened to obliterate a fleet Van Dyer sent to kill him. With rebellion erupting more and more, and even the Space Marine chapters and Mechanicus beginning to defy him, if not outright call for his head, Goge began turning the ecclesiarchal palace portion of Terra into a fortress, with the Brides of the Emperor manning the walls. In one corner, we have about 10,000 of the Brides of the Emperor defending. In the other corner, we have the Space Marines, the Mechanicus, and presumably a whole lot of other people alongside them, as well as Thor trying to push in and get Goge out. And the daughters held the line against this onslaught without fault, pushing back everyone from normal human to Astartes super soldier to keep Goge safe. You know someone's hardcore when they force Space Marines to back off, and eventually everyone realized this and the attackers phoned up the Adeptus Custodes to help him out. The Captain General of the Custodes went to the leader of the Brides, one Alicia Dominica, and tried to convince her that she was on the wrong side of things. She absolutely refused him, because while the Captain General may be second to the Emperor, he still isn't the Emperor, and that's the only authority they recognized. To convince her, he didn't pull that shield generator pretending to be a blessing trick, because he could do one better. He took Alicia, 5 of her closest companions, and marched them right up to Big E on the chair himself. After an unknown amount of time, they came back out, walked right up to Goge Van Dyer, and killed him on the spot. In the aftermath, there was of course some religious reformation, actions put into place to make sure no one could hold that much power again, all that boring political stuff, but then the question came up of what the hell to do with the Brides of the Emperor. For all that they were fighting on Goge's side, it was pretty clear that was out of devotion to the Emperor, not Goge. The moment they got proof he sucked, they put him in the ground. That's clear dedication to the Emperor, not any one corrupt asshole or other leading the Imperium. Plus, they put up a hell of a fight, and that was a lot of talent to just waste. So a compromise was made. The ecclesiarchy can no longer ever again have men-at-arms, but these are not men. These are women. There's a whole ass extra syllable added to that word. It's totally different. Also, believe it or not, that lore was quietly changed a few editions ago to essentially make it so that the sisters were just so kick-ass they got to stay as a standing army rather than the loophole thing. I think it was 7th or 8th edition that happened. But the loophole is more fun, and Warhammer 40k canon has always been what you want it to be and no more or less, so let's stick with that version, even if the latter is also fairly cool in its own way. From here on out, the Sisters of Battle, or the Adepta Sororitas if you'd like to be all official-like, were an officially recognized order of the Imperium. They would go on to participate in all the Imperium's various going-ons, from crusades to purging to suppressing rebellion and all that, and with a fairly respectable track record too. Only one has been properly recorded falling to chaos, and even if it's more than that, they're certainly far more loyal than other organizations. Even if a few thousand have turned, what's that compared to half of all Space Marines or the Mechanicum turning traitor during the Horus Heresy? They've since ordered themselves into various orders that each have different focuses and specialities. Some of them are still pretty similar in the broad strokes, of course. For example, not all members of the Adepta Sororitas are technically Sisters of Battle. They most likely can all fight, but only the Order's militant are proper Sisters of Battle. Between those different orders, they'll have different combat specialties, but the general vibe of gothic warrior woman fighting for the Emperor is pretty standard across all of them. Others, however, are incredibly varied, no doubt still with combat training, but devoted to different areas of expertise than caving people's faces in. The Order's Hospitaller are of course devoted to healing and whatnot, and can be found across not only Imperial worlds helping those in need of tending, but following basically all Imperial military forces. Not Space Marines, since they've got apothecaries, but everyone else can be tended to by a Hospitaller, and likely will depending on the circumstances. Orders Dialogus transcribe various documents across the Imperium, most commonly Xenos and heretical tomes. That might sound like a red flag, but since the Sisters are so inherently loyal, they're probably the least likely people to be corrupted by what they find. Orders Famulus tend to things like governors' palaces, and subtly or not so subtly remind them of their loyalties to the Emperor. Orders Princeps monitor the laws of the ecclesiarchy to make sure there's no potential Goge Van Dyers about to pop up again. They're a surprisingly varied bunch once you get past the combat side of things. They're even frequently the military arm of the Ordo Hereticus, so they've got some inquisitorial support when needed. Alternatively, they are forced into being inquisitorial support, but either way results in dead heretics, so I presume they're by and large happy with the arrangement. As you no doubt can guess, you can find Sisters of Battle in the greatest numbers on shrine worlds, where their convents will frequently be located out of. Here, hundreds of thousands of them can potentially be based out of, and their faith combined with the planet's inhabitants can repel chaos itself from intruding. Not perfectly, mind you, but in a Sisters of Battle stronghold, you better be breaking out greater demon-level threats if you even hope to succeed. Eventually, something real interesting started happening too. Imperial Saints, you see, don't have to be Sisters of Battle. Aside from the fact there are male saints, it isn't like they have a monopoly on worshipping the Emperor, but a fairly disproportionate amount of them do seem to come from the Sisters of Battle's ranks. Even more commonly, the Sisters' sheer faith in the Emperor of Mankind has more and more been seen manifesting itself onto the battlefield, either rejuvenating them or harming the enemies of mankind as they fight in their Lord's name. It's so common it's a damn tabletop mechanic, proving that no one has quite the level of respect for the Emperor as these gals. And it couldn't come soon enough. By the time of the 40-whateverth millennium we're onto nowadays, the Imperium needs all the defense it can get. Chaos is rising, the various Xenos races are overflowing, and while a whole lot of people seem to forget this, even without all that, planets rebel more and more by the day to break away from the crumbling empire, because the Imperium still sucks plenty on its own. Gilliman stands watching planet after planet fall, wishing for anything from the rest of his brothers coming back to the sweet release of death, and without divine intervention becoming a whole lot more regular, it would seem that the Imperium is doomed to fall. Luckily, the Sisters have brought just that, so let's see what they've got going for them. For the first lore positive, the Sisters of Battle, like I said, are for you if you want the most loyal possible faction in 40k, and I do mean out of all of 40k. This is an army that was technically opposing the entire Imperium of Man at one point, and they were allowed to hang around because in that opposition they were still being loyal to the best of their knowledge. The only truly known traitor of theirs is Miriel Sabathiel, which is an absolute mouthful of a name. There have been a few others, but those were in rather extenuating circumstances, such as Caiaphas Cain, where they were mind-controlled. Miriel was the first and perhaps only to fall to chaos willingly. Even then, willingly largely means she's happy where she is now, rather than how her initial recruitment went, as it were. The ones in Caiaphas Cain immediately threw themselves off a cliff the moment they were freed of mind control, and they probably didn't even need to do that. Maybe it's just because it was a Caiaphas Cain novel, but they probably would have gotten off the hook since they were mind-controlled, as was literally everyone else who heard their then-master's voice. Statistically speaking, there's almost certainly been at least a few others, but they are the very rare exceptions to the rule. Every other Sister of Battle is loyal to the Emperor through and through, something no one else can truly say in the Imperium. So if you too would rather die before dishonoring the Emperor, this army's for you. They're also a good pick if you want an example of what humanity can achieve in this setting without Space Marine level augmentations and whatnot. Sisters of Battle receive the most intensive training, and while their utter faith means they certainly aren't going to be altering the holy human form nearly as much as the Mechanicus, they'll also still take on augmentations if need be to keep fighting. But there's no special sauce going into the Sisters to make them better than the average human, just insane training from a young age at the Scala Progenium to make themselves the mightiest warriors possible, and it shows. They're a fearsome force, and the only complaint Guard commanders frequently have about them isn't them wishing they got proper Astartes or anything. Guard commanders instead dislike them on occasion for being too willing to just charge in and start taking names. There's no biological science here, there's no sorcery involved. There is their faith manifesting as miracles, but even then, that's not something that's necessarily unique to them. I have to imagine any other sufficiently faithful group of people could do the same stuff. The Sisters just push their body and spirit to the extreme, and for their trials, they're some of the toughest people around, mentally and physically. The Guard is often given the humanity hell yeah treatment for holding the line against all sorts of horrors, but honestly, if that's the vibe you want, I think you'd best look to the Sisters of Battle. They're also the pinnacle of the 40k aesthetic, rivaled perhaps only by the Dark Angels. The Sisters don't just worship in cathedrals, they drop cathedrals out of orbit to use as forward operating bases. Their armor isn't gothic, it's gothic premium. They'd run into battle with ornate, blessed armor, wielding swords, and screaming prayers to the God Emperor. I'd even go so far as to say that the Sisters of Battle have held the truest to the older style of 40k art while still being updated with modern times. I mean, just look at some of their codex art. It's not quite as busy or grimy as the older art of theirs, such as the one where the one sister has legs longer than Bayonetta's, but it still feels like that older art in a way. It's still grimy and gross a bit. You can see the winged baby flying around. They still look like nuns who've decided you need to speak with their god personally. And yes, the sister carrying an entire altar on her back still has legs for days. The sisters are not only the peak of 40k's aesthetic, but especially compared to some more modern things like the new Sanguinary Guard or the travesty that is the new Kotiaz mini, they're the only people carrying the Imperium's aesthetic as it once was. On a somewhat related note, they're the only ones that really embrace the spirit of the God Emperor, and as much as they are peak human form, they're also embracing the fact that 40k is a fantasy setting. Now, that comes with a massive asterisk, of course. There are a few Space Marine chapters that worship Big E as a god in one form or another, and of course any guardsman will give praise to the Emperor after a hard-fought battle, but most Space Marines don't view him as a god, and to some extent still buy into that Imperial truth nonsense. The Guard, meanwhile, is more than happy to rely on the big guns to carry them instead of the Emperor. An understandable thing because basilisks are awesome, but they're still leaning more into material things to fight. The sisters, meanwhile, are faith through and through. As funny as it is when Caiaphas Cain complains about how they could be so uptight with the prayer and whatnot, that prayer is giving them actual real advantages. And depending on how much you think tabletop translates to lore, they can do this so reliably that it forms battle plans. After all, when you base your game plan around the miracle dice, what are you doing if not putting your faith in the Emperor to carry the day? And if it works, is that not the faith of your Sororitas army being rewarded? The Sisters of Battle are also a surprisingly versatile army, both in terms of scale and in terms of narrative possibility. True, you are limited to them all being faithful, but even ignoring fiction, just look at how many real-world religions have and currently do exist to see just how far the concept of faith can take you when you make the lore for your own army. And hell, this is 40k, get weird with it, take inspiration from some cults. There is something I have to say about this in the cons section, but if the idea of them being faithful is something you think is too limiting a factor, then I'm sorry, but I think you need to work on the imagination. Faith is such a varied thing, and this army can showcase that if you don't mind putting some work in. As for other narrative stuff, they can be found at any scale of engagement doing any sort of activity. Caiaphas Cain bemoans how they're all shoot first, ask questions never, but in one of his novels, there's an older sister who's fairly level-headed. She still kicks ass, of course. No one gets to be old in this setting without being a tough bastard, but she's proof you can have Sororitas whose fury is tempered by age and experience. Your warband can be flavored in a variety of ways based on this, be they the purest of rage nuns or something a bit more tactical and nuanced. They can also be found at all levels of scale. Grand battles where the fate of the Imperium is at stake? Well, of course the Sisters of Battle are there. They must fight for the Emperor. Small-level skirmishes on backwater worlds? The Emperor's flock must be protected, even if just by a lone bastion of a few dozen warriors. If you want, you can even have your army be based on one of the non-combat orders. Sisters of Battle come from the Scala Progenium, so as Cain puts it, I'm sure even the ones that go to non-militant orders can still rugby tackle you like a champion. And again, it's 40k. Once you get above the level of people chained to a forge somewhere, you can at least try and put up a fight. I'm sure your Order Hospitaller Sisters army can do just fine when the punches start flying. Here's a pro with a very obvious flip side you can see coming later on. They are sometimes shown as being equal even to Space Marines. Go look at the 9th edition trailer. The Sisters are basically fighting on par with the Ultramarines, and at one point they blow away a Necron to save a Marine. They aren't pushovers, they can stand toe-to-toe with the best of them. Keyword, can be shown doing that. More later on that. Their acronym is also SOB, because they're tough SOBs, you see. Or DOBs, I guess, but I had to make that joke somewhere, so here it goes. Last lore positive for me, the Sisters of Battle are perfect for those of you who just hate everyone else in the setting. Not passively dislike, not view with arrogant contempt, not even something like the Tyranids where there are no emotions involved, just hunger. Because I promise you, you can find an excuse for a Sister of Battle to hate literally anyone else, and therefore fight anyone else. Xenos, foul corruptions of the human form at best and filthy abominations at worst. Cleanse them all. Chaos? That's the archenemy. You need no explanation for that one. The Guard? Clearly the Militarum presence in the local region has been faltering, perhaps because of heresy. Better kill them all for their pathetic shows of faith the Emperor finds disgusting. Even the Space Marines? Those vile mutants turn traitor en masse once, and they can do so again, and with how autonomous they tend to act, you can never be too sure a given chapter isn't planning something. Best deal with the Emperor's failed science project now before they get the chance to act on those plans. If you want a reason to not just fight someone, but fight them with passion in your heart, this is the army for you. And since they love doing so with fire, you can add that as a final bonus positive if you're a pyromaniac. Let's start with the overall stuff. Miracle Dice, also known as let's just give everything the Eldar have to the Imperium. At the start of every battle round, as well as when one of your units is totally wiped, you roll a d6. You then store it in your Miracle Dice pool, and then essentially whenever you would have to roll, you can instead use one of the Miracle Dice in your pool. Advancing, charging, damage rolls for something like a d6, basically every roll in the game can be substituted. You can only use one at a time, so you can't save your Miracle Dice for a 12-inch charge, and you have to say you're using it before you make the roll. Still though, very powerful ability. I should know because this is basically Fate Dice, and I've pumped enough exploding 6 hits into Kane's sword gun to realize how damn powerful that can be in the right circumstances. Before they stole it from the Eldar anyways. Cheating as a mechanic is always a powerful thing, and can lead you to victory if you play it right. It's also very important to know that you get the miracle die for a destroyed unit the moment it's destroyed, not at the end of the phase. So if your opponent is about to wipe the floor with you, that little rule can potentially save a character or let you get a good hit in return first. For their detachments, the Hallowed Martyrs is all about power from pain. Damaged units get a +1 to hit, and under half-strength units get a +1 to wound rolls, with their enhancements similarly buffing wounded units or working best on wounded characters. Their stratagems, sure enough, allow under-strength units to fight better, force an opponent to target a specific unit because they're trying to die so hard it apparently mind controls the enemy, and it can even resurrect slain characters from how cool they martyred themselves. Can't do that last one with Saint Celestine, unfortunately, and you can only do it once per character, but I'm really hoping I don't need to tell you how powerful it can be to just resurrect a character with potentially all their health restored. This attachment is for those who want to play the sisters like the Guard, essentially, only in this case the meat shields only get stronger for being meat shields. The Penitent Host attachment, meanwhile, is perhaps the easiest to explain, because it does exactly what you think it does. Models with a Penitent keyword can be made stronger in a variety of ways, such as how at the start of every battle phase you can buff them in one of a few ways. Their stratagems, sure enough, also buff Penitent units, and I would like to shout out this particular one that gives one Penitent unit a 4-up feel no pain save for a single command point. Good God, could that be infuriating. Bringers of Flame gives all your ranged weapons the assault keyword because the Eldar will have nothing to themselves anymore, and if they're within 6 inches whoever they're shooting at, you add 1 strength to the weapon. Their enhancements and stratagems, meanwhile, seem to be a bit of a smorgasbord of random crap, but most of it useful. Discard Miracle Dice so a character can an extra attack for each die discarded, giving their melee weapons lethal hits. Whole lot of different crap, like I said. There are 3 different stratagems for helping out either transports or units in transports, which given their detachment rule buffs them for being close, means these are very much the hit and run way to play the sisters. Or at least the run up and hit you way to play, I guess. But also you could probably still get value out of this detachment even without too many transports from how varied it is. And the last detachment is Army of Faith. The army lets you use 2 of the Acts of Faith on a unit per phase instead of just 1. The enhancements are all about getting Fate dice, or in one case letting a Fate die just be an auto success if you use it on a saving throw. So this detachment is already the single best one in the game if we're judging them based off of how much they can piss your opponent off. The stratagems for this detachment, meanwhile, are pretty much entirely devoted to helping you do stuff with jump packs. Stratagem wise, this does lock you into the jump pack units for the most optimal way to play, but even if not, getting extra usage out of Miracle Dice is a huge thing to have. Also, the look on the other player's face when you use the natural 1 you rolled for a Miracle Dice substitution, and then calmly inform them that you passed the throw. Even if I won against someone who did that to me, I'd still leave the table angry. Let's get cracking on their units now though, shall we? Before we look at any one in particular, you'll notice that most of their stat lines have a 3-up save and a 6-up invuln. Your units have pretty great saves, since after all, the sisters all have power armor, so if your enemies can't punch through your saves because they lack armor piercing, then you've already won the fight. The standard Battle Sister squad is your bread and butter, and has so many goddamned weapon options that the full page does not fit on the screen. Most of them will have bolters, but you can find something for any situation to give to at least one of the models in the unit. There is something wonderful about having 3 different options of flamer available to you, I have to admit. Kind of like I said earlier, it's nice that the sisters remember the theming the Marines forgot, them being jacks of all trades with something for every situation. Their point cost being 105 for 10 models right now is really aggravating to look at, but it's solid enough for what they provide. I'm sure it's for balancing reasons, but for the love of God, knock those 5 points off, and even 100 is so close. They've also got sticky objectives. Once a battle, you can target them with an act of faith and get your miracle die basically refunded, albeit you do have to re-roll it again, and depending on how many of them you have near objectives, you can potentially get a whole boatload of more miracle dice. Dominion squads are basically the same thing, but 10 points more expensive, and once a turn they can run away from enemy units that come close to them, as long as they aren't directly in engagement range. The army isn't exactly flooded with vehicle options, but they have decent choices at least. The Rhino is is the Rhino, the ever-reliable transport, and it's something I'll certainly talk about with the downsides, the holder of one of your longest-ranged weapons, as well as one of the best high-strength weapons you have. The Castigator, meanwhile, is more of a traditional tank, with either autocannons for up-close and personal damage, or the battle cannon for firing slightly higher strength shots at range. It can even give friendly units higher AP against a targeted shot at each turn. It can also take the Hunter-Killer missile, which against high-toughness armies you should always do. In fact, always do it regardless. An Exorcist is a pipe organ missile launcher that can force battle shock tests and make explosive demise actually happen for once, and an Immolator sure has flamers on it. You can replace them with a Multi-Melta, which could be a valid play, or a Twin Heavy Bolter, which, you know, I don't like definitively saying you should or shouldn't do things too often, but in this case, do not replace the flamer with the Twin Heavy Bolters. This thing is called an Immolator. Use it to light things on fire. The Immolator can also hold 6 people, so since it's a transport, if a rather weak one, you should probably be moving it up the field instead of holding it back. The Bolter's got double the range and does do more damage, but between the transport capability and the flamers potentially quadrupling how many attacks you can get off, none of which need to actually roll to hit, it strikes me as the much better choice. The rest of the roster's pretty nice too. Arco-Flagellants, aside from being goddamn metal, can do a whirlwind of melee attacks. If you feel a bit risky, you can give them Hazardous whenever they fight in exchange for 2 more attacks per model. It's canon that this is through a trigger word, so get creative with it. Look your opponent in the eyes and say something awful like boy smell, and then get an extra 2 attacks per model for it. They've got 2 wounds a pop too, so even if you roll a 1 and hurt yourself, it won't immediately remove the model. Unless you roll multiple ones, which you might, but that's the price of pain. Repentia squads meanwhile are Arco-Flagellants, but better and pricier for it, with a native rerolling to both hit and wound rolls as long as the Repentia Superior is still alive. Rush them in and get swinging, because even if they die, all that means is you get more miracle dice. But are mere people rushing into their deaths not enough for you? No worries at all, my friend. Allow me to introduce you to the Penitent Engine. In lore, these things are engines of pain and destruction that real nasty heretics get strapped to so they can redeem themselves in combat. Redemption comes with death, naturally. On the tabletop, their flamethrower are monstrosities that can also have either massive flails or buzzsaws equipped, depending on if you're cutting through low toughness or higher toughness targets. It can even advance and charge in the same turn. Very nice. You can also take a Mortifier for even more into BDSM. These are reserved for sister Repentias that ran away instead of earning their forgiveness in battle. On the tabletop, Mortifiers can't advance and charge, but they can get one last swing in when destroyed in melee, as long as you roll a 2 or higher. You can also give them a Heavy Bolter instead of a Flamer, and since the Mortifier's Flamer is worse than the Penitent Engines, the choice is yours as to which one you'd like. Did you know Mortifiers have technology that makes their occupant feel exponentially more guilt over their sins, real or otherwise? Isn't that fun? There's also Celestian Sacrosants, in case you want to beat people to death with something slightly more low-key. They can freely choose either their mace or their halberd, so which you go with is ultimately a matter of if you want more damaging attacks or higher strength attacks. Their range game isn't phenomenal, but since it's all pistols, it doesn't need to be. They're going to be shooting in melee range, that's always nice. Seraphim squads are for when you want to go all John Wick on people with jump packs, rocking it with dual-wielded pistols with some alternate loadouts and the ability to move after they shoot. Zephyrim squads instead get 1 pistol and a power weapon to hit people with. They're the exact same point-wise, so the choice is if you want to shoot or stab. And Paragon Warsuits are baby versions of the Grey Knight Baby Carrier. Slightly less stupid looking, but the Dread Knight is so stupid it goes back to being fun, so these things to me are only stupid enough to just look stupid. They do at least have a lot of solid options, and the War Mace is one of your best, and only, ways to reliably deal double-digit strength damage. Oh, and because I forgot about them, the Retributor squad all have heavy bolters. It's important to note that Sisters of Battle don't have extreme augmentations like I said, which means they're just lifting these things around and carrying them into battle. That's impressive. As for their characters, let's lightning round a few of them because Holy Mother of God is the Sisters range like 70% characters. A Dialogus can unbattle shock a unit for free once per battle, and when they're leading a unit, they can make a miracle dice spent on that unit an automatic 6. Not very good as far as combat goes, but it is yet another way to get more nonsense out of your miracle dice. Imagifiers give units they lead a 2-up save and 4-up invuln, because why not make everyone as tanky as a Primarch, and they can let you reroll the miracle dice when you first get the result if they're close to a destroyed unit that granted you 1. A Canoness meanwhile can do some respectable work on the battlefield and provides quite a few buffs. Once a battle, she can give herself a 2-up invuln save. Once per battle round, she can reduce the command point cost of a stratagem targeting her or a unit she leads by 1. She also lets a unit she's leading reroll roll hit rolls of 1. This ability is a bit more niche, but any psychic attacks that target her or her unit also have to get through the 4-up Feel No Pain save she provides against them, because your whack space magic is nothing compared to the power of the Holy Spirit. Palatines give a unit lethal hits for nothing, and in exchange for a miracle die, you can also give the unit they're leading a free mortal wound for every melee attack they make that wounds. Hospitalers give a unit a 5-up Feel No Pain save and can resurrect models, and at the risk of this getting way too nitty-gritty for how these videos usually are, I'm going to skip over the remaining heroes and just make the broad statement that if you want a role filled, you can find a character to fill it. Although I do have to give one final shout out to the sister Dogmata though. Not for any rules reasons, but because if you give her the helmetless option, she's mogging the enemy the entire match. For unique characters, Saint Celestine is of course the premier one. At toughness 3, she certainly isn't the toughest gal around, but with a 2-up save and 4-up infalm, she can still last a bit. That 4-up Feel No Pain when her backup dancers are still kicking certainly helps too. Being able to sacrifice her mini Celestines also keeps her alive, since you can just give attacks to them rather than Celestine herself. Further helped by the fact that she can resurrect one of them or some of the models from a jump pack unit she leads every command phase. While she on paper isn't that long lasting, in practice she can stick around for quite a while. And because I'm still not done with that, the first time she dies, as long as you roll a 2 or higher, she comes back with full health. Her sword has a ranged flame attack and is fairly decent in melee, and between fly and her movement of 12 inches, she can get where you need her to be no problem. The Triumph of St. Catherine, meanwhile, is a buff wagon. It has 18 wounds, and you can pick 2 of the abilities it has at the start of every battle round to buff nearby units with. And naturally, it also lets you get miracle dice, in this case guaranteeing the one you get per battle round for free is always a 6. And while not meant for fighting, this thing does have 18 decent attacks, so if it gets jumped by chaff, you probably don't need to worry too much about them at least. And of course, Morven Valen, the Queen Baby Carrier, is the new star of the show. She's tanky for the sisters, she hits hard, gives free rerolls for hitting and wounding, she can use miracle dice to give her gun and lance 3 extra attacks whenever she fights, and of course, if she wipes a unit, you get another miracle die. She kicks ass, that's all there is to it. For a non-rules positive, something nice about the sisters is that they're all plastic. Well, not quite a new army anymore, they're certainly one of the more modern ones after their proper reintroduction to the game a few years back. They're all plastic and they all look good. In my opinion, they also appear to be a nice middle ground in terms of painting skill required. They aren't quite Custodes or Space Marine easy, but since they're all in power armor, they won't be too hard to do the broad strokes of. A lot of the finer details can also just be painted gold, so that's fairly simple as well. A talented painter can do wonders with them, while an unskilled painter shouldn't find their basic units too difficult to come to terms with. Some models of theirs definitely get a bit intense, but by and large I wouldn't say they're the hardest thing to paint. I have in full disclosure, however, not painted any Sisters of Battle models, and I'm just going off of how I think it would be based on appearances, so if I'm wrong, I do apologize. And for the last tabletop positive, pain, agony, misery, and despair. Do you know where you can find the singular named Harlequin character on the tabletop? It's here. It's in the Sisters of Battle army. Ephriel Stern and Kaiganil. There they are. It hurts. It hurts so bad, man. I just want the clowns to be special again. There's one elf in Eldar army even the pointy-ear haters can appreciate to some extent, and they're only characters in the Sisters roster. Why? 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 Anyways, lore downsides now. I think I'd just like to be yelled at right away, so I'll rip the band-aid off and tell you that I think the Sisters of Battle might be the most evil army in the setting from a certain viewpoint. Now obviously I know they're not the Dark Eldar or Chaos, but they have a much more mundane kind of evil to them. The evil of blind faith leading them to commit the most brutal acts possible. If they think you're a heretic, you're simply dead. There will be no mercy, there will be no respite, they're just gonna burn you alive. The Sisters of Battle will commit all the atrocities of the Imperium without even pausing to think about if it's right. In their mind, this is what the Emperor wants them to do, and so every single possible action they can take is done with the blessing of their conscience. 40k being 40k, they're going to be doing a whole lot of messed up things. It's a much tamer kind of evil, like I said, but it is something I feel worth mentioning. The Sisters of Battle are almost like the logical extreme of the phrase "I was just following orders," only in their case, the orders probably turned them on a little bit. Speaking of, the Sisters have a bit of a masochistic tendency going on with them that pushes beyond self-sacrificing and into the territory of army-wide psychological damage. Dying for the Emperor is the best thing they could possibly do, and they'll throw themselves into any fight to achieve that goal and take heretics with them. That's Kane's chief complaint of them. They oftentimes don't follow orders, they don't make battle plans, they just run in swinging, screaming the Emperor's name, and if they die, they died fighting for the Emperor. I mean, just look at the Sister Repentius. That is not something a healthy mind will do. Just because it's common practice doesn't make it good, and stripping down to basically nothing and charging machine gun nests is where we start to tip over from willing to die for the cause and to just willing to die. Everyone makes the same joke about Kriegsmen walking into landmines to die for the Emperor and clear the field, but I think the Sisters might in some cases genuinely do something like that. Kriegsmen want to die to redeem their sins. Even the Sisters outside the Repentia oftentimes just come across as wanting to die, although admittedly, I too would probably choose death rather than live in 40k. I suppose if you're really into masochism, this is a good army for you, but it would still be nice if GW authors didn't have a bit of a potentially literal fetish for having the Sisters enjoy getting the shit kicked out of them. Yes, accuse me of being woke with that statement, but I've seen the fan art you fuckers make of the Sisters Repentia. Tell me what that is if not fetish bait. Now, the above might not be that much of a problem if GW didn't have a seeming vested interest in showing Sisters of Battle getting obliterated. The first appearance of the Necrons against the Imperium in-universe came about because of a tabletop match they turned into lore, where the Necrons basically wiped the Sisters' army entirely. This seemed to start a running trend. The Sisters were cannibalized by the Sons of Malice, a demon engine basically killed an entire shrine world worth of sororitas, a bunch of them died off-screen to keep Caiaphas Cain safe. One time, the Grey Knights murdered a bunch of them to make anti-demon wards out of their blood to paint onto their armor, which is certainly one of Matt Ward's finer pieces of writing. And in Dawn of War, they just started attacking everyone, Imperium included, and they canonically lost. Granted, everyone in Dawn of War Soulstorm was fighting each other, Imperium or not, but still, not a great look when combined with everything else. They're in a very awkward, shall we say, position, where there's non-zero odds that they're both going to be portrayed dying, and that it may damn well be self-inflicted to some extent. Even if that latter bit isn't true in a given piece of lore, Saint Celestine still got her ass beat by Abaddon the moment the Necron pylons were activated on Cadia. Not a very good look for someone who's basically the spiritual leader of the entire faction. Just a heads up is all. If you go with the Sisters, you run the risk of playing the army GW likes to kill so that someone else can look cooler for it. They're also somewhat lacking in books. Certainly not the worst off army in 40k, but compared to the Guard, they're in need of some more development. And compared to Space Marines, of course, but saying someone has less books than Space Marines is a meaningless statement. Unless your name is Gotrek or Felix, you have less book appearances than almost any given name Space Marine character. It's not a crippling deficiency, but you'll probably run out of Sisters books sooner rather than later if you're really dedicated with going through their stories. A rather more glaring issue is that the lore of the Sisters that does exist is incredibly narrow. The Order of Our Martyred Lady is a kick-ass sect of the sororitas that I'd say does deserve the spotlight of the army. Someone has to be the default of a faction, and they've earned it. The problem is, Games Workshop seems to forget they aren't the only order around. Almost all of their special characters come from that order, with the rest practically languishing in obscurity. The non-combat orders barely get shit worth of screen time, which is understandable in a wargame setting, but it would at least be nice to see them mentioned more regularly. Entire campaigns have probably relied on the Order's hospitality to keep themselves alive. Can we get a bit more love for them at least? For the love of God, the Hospitaller mini has her painted in the Order of Our Martyred Lady color scheme on the website. Games Workshop, I promise you that other parts of this army exist. They're fun and interesting. We won't all abandon the faction because you talked about other bits of them. This is closer to what I meant in the previous point. Space Marines get away with the more minor players being less focused on, because less focused on for Space Marines means they only have half a dozen books. Some of the Sisters orders are basically Codex footnotes, and that footnote may damn well be about how they got their ass kicked. I mentioned one of the upsides having a downside to it earlier, and that's that the aspect of faith being a varied and multifaceted thing is not at all represented by what we get out of the Sisters. Every single one of them is Catholic, Gothic, and power armored, except the Repentia, who are Catholic, Gothic, and naked. The Imperium being an ancient, galaxy-spanning empire of countless different cultures does not at all come across from the Sisters. The different Space Marine chapters all have plenty of different characterizations to be had, and even with GW axing almost every old Guard regiment that was unique, they still have a couple different aesthetics and whatnot to choose from. Hell, I think even the Eldar have more variety in this department, because at least in the lore, the different craft worlds are vastly different from one another. Depending on which models you specialize in, an Eldar army can look completely different from another one while still keeping the same theme. The Sisters, meanwhile, will always look the same if you're using official GW stuff, which is a shame, because like I said, you can do so much with the concept of faith. I love the gothic look, but I wish there was something more. Like how Space Marine chapters are all warrior monks, but each chapter has some theming to make them stand apart. The sisters are all the same nun with a gun. I'm sure someone will say that's the point, and fair enough, I'm not criticizing the aesthetic itself. The sisters are on point with it. It's a good thing for them to be a one-trick pony of. But with how broad religion can be and how it's been stated that the Imperial cult has thousands of different interpretations to it, I really wish we got to see something like that with the Sisters of Battle. First off, for their tabletop downsides, their toughness. It's bad. Almost all models, even Saint Celestine herself, are toughness 3. Them all having invuln saves at a certain point stops being a nice feature and starts being a necessity. While the default save they have being 3 up means only hugely armor-piercing weapons will need the invuln save to matter against, if they're being hit with a strength 6 or higher weapon, they're toast. With the abundance of strength 6 weapons in this game, wounding the majority of the Sisters roster on a 2 is not at all a stretch of the imagination. Maybe I'm biased because my normal game of 40k has been Orc Flashkits and Eldar Wraiths duking it out with each other, but it is not difficult to wound the Sisters if their save can be bypassed. On a related note, the Sisters at their best are a nice middle ground between the Imperial Guard and the Space Marines. They're certainly better equipped than the Guard, but they come in far greater numbers than the Marines. This is true in both the lore and the tabletop. The downside of this, as you can no doubt guess, comes into play here with their point costs and things like that. Them averaging strength 4 shots with their bolters does at least offensively put them on the same power level as a Space Marine. The issue is that Space Marines are far tougher, so they can't stand up to that same level of firepower coming back to them. The Guard, meanwhile, is worse all around, but Guardsmen are dirt cheap. Your standard unit of Cadian shock troops is 120 points for 20 models right now. A Battle Sister squad is 105 for 10. If you can't find a way to properly play them as a middle ground between Guardsmen and Marines, you're going to lose as you fail to both outnumber and outpower the enemy. Piling onto this point, because to me it really is the crux of the Sisters' weaknesses, they are severely lacking in the vehicle department. They have heavier hitting things like the penitent engines or the missiles all their vehicles can take, but those Sisters aren't dying in front of something nearly as imposing as the mighty Baneblade. You've got 4 vehicles, and while I won't go so far as to say they're bad, they're nothing compared to what some other factions can bring to bear in that department. That gigantic missile they all have is a once-a-game ability, and unless I glaringly miss something, is also their highest strength weapon. If you roll poorly or misplace the shot, you've wasted your best anti-armor weapon. They've also got few high-toughness models and nothing in the same league as Demon Primarchs or an Avatar of Cain, so proper usage of models like them can decimate the Sisters. You've not got the beefiest things in the game, nor do you have something absolutely devastating to put bodies in front of. What you have is a large variety of things that are good, not things that you can mindlessly march up the board and obliterate whatever steps in their path. They're also lacking a bit in the range game for that matter, at least when it comes to distance. The Sisters of Battle are unbelievably fierce in close quarters shooting, and their melee game isn't anything to scoff at either. But properly dedicated melee armies can rip them to shreds, and outranging them won't be terribly difficult either. They're in an awkward middle ground you need to find a way to make the best of. Too close, and their shit toughness means they'll be ripped apart. Too far, and you won't be able to meaningfully respond to the enemy. You need to either learn proper positioning, or get used to spamming rhinos if you want to find success with this army. All of this culminates in the fact that GW seems to really want you to play the Sisters like they're the Guard, i.e. sending wave after wave of them to their deaths, or at least they're tempting you into doing so. Getting miracle dice when a unit is wiped and all the countless detachment buffs and stratagems to wounded units is a nice thing. It means even at less than half strength, the Sisters unit is always a threat. The problem comes when you start getting overzealous with it. The Sisters being so hellbent on dying for the Emperor that it becomes a tabletop mechanic is a nice touch, but if you lean too hard into it, you won't have an army before long. While not as expensive as Marines, I would say the Sisters are points-wise just pricey enough that if you let half your army get wiped without a plan, you're gonna lose more often than not. And it can be tempting to sacrifice unit after unit to stock up on miracle dice, but do that too much and you'll find you only have 3 units and a named character left to spend them on. Miracle dice are not the end-all be-all to buff your last remaining unit on the field into God mode, and I know this because Fate dice weren't either. Getting 1 guaranteed saving throw doesn't mean much when you need to make another 20 if you want the unit to survive. They can let you win key engagements, but if your plan is to throw all your soldiers into the meat grinder and let miracle dice save the day, then you're in for a rude awakening. And last tabletop downside, the unfortunate issue of real-world money. The Sisters of Battle are not a cheap army to collect. The halfway point between Guardsmen Guardsmen and Marines in terms of effectiveness has in some ways translated into you needing to buy Guardsman levels of models for not quite Marine levels of effectiveness, at least depending on your army comp. It'll cost a pretty penny to get into this army, and don't think you can just buy Saint Celestine and get a quarter of the army right there, because even she's only 160 points. I think their combat patrol is ass, and their prices aren't much better, so I hope your faith in the Emperor is strong enough that you don't mind missing out on a car payment or two for this army. And those were the Sisters of Battle. Courageous, strong, steadfast, and more than a little bit insane. But for Warhammer, what better army is there than that? Go die for the Emperor, because even if your faith isn't rewarded, your battle sisters just might be. Thank you as always to my wonderful channel members. You are the blind faith of the sisters to my Imperium, supporting something that probably should just be left to die. If you'd like to support the channel, feel free to subscribe or become a member. Either way, thank you for watching, and take care out there. Yes, because I know someone's going to mention it in the comments if I don't. Sisters of Battle don't have to swear a vow of chastity. They almost certainly won't be banging you, because you're here watching 40k lore and tabletop videos, but never say never and all that, I guess. I'm not saying I'm any better, I'm just letting you know that they're almost certainly out of your league.